The morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of the mansion, casting a soft glow across polished marble floors that had never known a speck of dust. Everything in the house was perfect, too perfect, some would say. But perfection was something Richard Halston demanded. He had built his life on control, precision, and power. As one of the youngest billionaires in the country, he was used to things working exactly the way he wanted. Except today, nothing was. The red Ferrari sat motionless in the center of his private garage, surrounded by tools, diagnostics machines, and three of the most highly paid mechanics money could buy. The car gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its body flawless, its design a masterpiece of engineering, but it refused to start. Richard stood nearby, his jaw clenched, arms folded tightly across his chest. He had spent millions acquiring rare cars, but this Ferrari was special. It wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of his success, his arrival into a world where only a few could exist. And now it was betraying him. "I don't understand, sir," one of the mechanics said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We've replaced the ignition system, recalibrated the ECU, checked the fuel lines. Everything is functioning perfectly. On paper, this car should run." "But it doesn't," Richard snapped, his voice cold enough to freeze the air. "I didn't pay you to tell me what should happen. I paid you to fix it." The mechanics exchanged uneasy glances. They had been at it for days, cycling through every possible solution. Parts had been flown in from overseas. Specialists had been called. Nothing worked. Richard turned away in frustration, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't used to losing, especially not to a car. Upstairs, unnoticed by most of the household, Maria quietly moved from room to room, cleaning. She had worked in the mansion for years, her presence almost invisible. She spoke little, kept her head down, and did her job with quiet diligence. But today, she seemed distracted. Her son, Daniel, had come with her. He rarely did. In fact, she avoided bringing him whenever possible. The world Richard lived in was not meant for people like them, but there had been no one to watch him, and she had no choice. "Stay close," she whispered earlier that morning, "and don't touch anything." Daniel nodded obediently. He was a quiet boy, observant, with eyes that seemed to notice things others missed. While his clothes were simple and worn, there was a sharpness in his gaze that didn't belong to a child his age. Now, as Maria worked upstairs, Daniel wandered. He didn't mean to. Curiosity pulled him along the long hallways, past paintings worth more than entire neighborhoods, down a staircase he had never seen before. And then he found it. The garage. He paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. The shiny cars, the men in uniforms, the tension in the air. It was like stepping into another world. His eyes landed on the Ferrari. Even someone who knew nothing about cars could tell it was extraordinary. Daniel stepped closer. "Hey," one of the mechanics barked, "you can't be in here." But Richard held up a hand, stopping him. For a moment, Richard studied the boy. There was something oddly calm about him, something that didn't match the situation. "Let him be," Richard said. "It's not like he can make things worse." A few of the mechanics chuckled nervously. Daniel didn't react. He simply walked around the Ferrari, his small footsteps echoing softly. He crouched near the front, then moved to the side, then to the back, his eyes scanning every detail. "What are you doing?" Richard asked, a hint of curiosity creeping into his voice despite himself. Daniel hesitated, then spoke softly. "Looking." The simplicity of the answer caught Richard off guard. "Looking at what?" he pressed. Daniel pointed toward the rear of the car. "There." One of the mechanics scoffed. "Kid, we've checked everything." "Wait," Richard interrupted. Something in the boy's tone made him pause. "Go on," Richard said. Daniel stepped closer to the back of the Ferrari. He reached out but stopped just short of touching it, as if remembering his mother's warning. "The sound," Daniel said quietly. "What sound?" Richard asked. "When you tried to start it," Daniel replied. "It made a click but not a full one." The mechanics looked at each other again. It's probably just the starter, one of them said dismissively. We replaced that already. Daniel shook his head. Not the starter. Then what? Richard asked, now fully engaged. Daniel hesitated, unsure if he should speak. But something about Richard's gaze, intense, demanding, pushed him forward. The ground, Daniel said. Silence fell over the garage. The ground, one mechanic repeated, confused. Daniel nodded. My teacher said electricity needs a full path. If something is loose, it won't complete it. One of the mechanics frowned. We checked all the connections. Did you check the ground cable to the chassis? Another mechanic asked suddenly, his tone shifting. A pause. No, the first admitted. Not specifically. Richard's eyes narrowed. Check it. The mechanics moved quickly now, their earlier confidence replaced with urgency. They inspected the grounding point near the rear of the car. And then, wait, one of them said. He leaned in closer. There's corrosion here, and the bolt isn't tight. Another mechanic grabbed a tool, tightening the connection and cleaning the contact point. The garage held its breath. Try it, Richard ordered. One mechanic slid into the driver's seat. He turned the key. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the engine roared to life. The sound filled the garage, deep and powerful, vibrating through the air like a living thing awakening. Everyone froze. Then, almost at once, the mechanics erupted into disbelief. No way. That was it. All this time. Richard didn't move. His eyes were fixed on Daniel. The boy stood quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. You fixed it, Richard said slowly. Daniel shook his head. I just saw something. Richard stepped closer, studying him more carefully now. What's your name? He asked. Daniel. How old are you? 12. Richard glanced at the mechanics, then back at Daniel. 12, he repeated, almost to himself. At that moment, Maria rushed into the garage, her face pale with worry. I'm so sorry, sir, she said quickly, grabbing Daniel's arm. He wasn't supposed to be here. I told him not to. It's fine, Richard said. Maria blinked, surprised. He fixed my car, Richard added. She looked at Daniel, confused. What? Richard gestured toward the Ferrari, its engine still purring smoothly. Maria's eyes widened. She started, but words failed her. Richard turned to one of the mechanics. How much have I spent trying to fix this? The mechanic hesitated. Including parts and labor, around 3 million. Richard let out a short, almost disbelieving laugh. 3 million, he repeated, and all it took was someone who actually paid attention. His gaze returned to Daniel. What school do you go to? He asked. Daniel named a small, underfunded public school. Richard nodded slowly. Do you like machines? He asked. Daniel's eyes lit up for the first time. Yes. Richard smiled faintly. It was the first genuine smile anyone in that house had seen from him in a long time. Good, Richard said, because I think you're going to learn a lot more about them. Maria's grip on Daniel tightened slightly. Sir. Richard looked at her. Your son has a gift, he said plainly, and gifts like that shouldn't be wasted. Maria swallowed, unsure of what he meant. I'm going to take care of his education, Richard continued. The best schools, the best training, whatever he needs. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Sir, No, Richard said gently. This isn't charity, he earned it. He glanced back at the Ferrari, then at Daniel. Sometimes, Richard added, his voice quieter now, the solution isn't about how much money you throw at a problem, but who you're willing to listen to. Daniel met his gaze, and for a moment the two stood in silence, one a billionaire who had everything, the other a boy who had almost nothing. Yet somehow, in that moment, they were equals. The engine of the Ferrari hummed steadily in the background, no longer a symbol of frustration, but of something far more unexpected. A reminder that brilliance can come from anywhere. And sometimes, the person no one notices is the one who changes everything.